The morning was a beautiful one. Although it gave the promise of a sweltering day, the scene presented to my eyes as I surveyed the field was one of marvelous beauty and grandeur. I cannot pretend to express in words what I felt as I found myself one among thousands of combatants who were about to engage in a deadly and desperate struggle. Loretta Haneta Velázquez.
The meeting engagement was sudden and furious, the Grey troops having the advantage of firing the first volley.
I remained in line guarding the colors and thus given a definite point at which the men could rally as the skirmish deepened in a general engagement.
The Federal artillery, which sent its shells showering over us and bursting in our ranks, creating terrible slaughter, was commanded by an acquaintance of mine, Ricketts. I did the best I could to send him as he sent for the sake of old times when we were friends.
The news of this disaster spread along our lines like wildfire. Officers and men were alike confounded. Regiment after regiment broke and ran, and almost immediately the panic commenced. Companies of cavalry were drawn up in line across the road with drawn sabers, but all was not sufficient to stop the refluent tide of fugitives. Sarah Emma Edmonds.
You were the only one who was ever kind to me since I entered the army. At Chancellorsville, I was shot through the body and was carried to the hospital in the woods where I lay for hours and not a surgeon would touch me, when you came along and gave me water and bound up my wounds.
Women's roles during the Civil War typically included nursing, cooking, and occasionally spying. Some, like Annie Etheridge, served as daughters of the regiment. Gentle Annie often took the same chances as the men, running out into the heat of a battlefield to administer medical aid to the troops. Another role that women could fill was that of vivandière. Their unique outfits resembled those of their European counterparts. Many, like Marie Tepe, traveled with the soldiers and took most of the same risks. Even more in number than the vivandières and the daughters of the regiment were female spies. Pauline Cushman was one of them, making public sentiments for the South for the purpose of gaining their confidence. She did counterintelligence in Kentucky, learning who was loyal to the North and who was not from people who confided in her. The lifestyle caught up with her at last when Nathan Bedford Forrest captured and interrogated her. Finding her guilty, Forrest sentenced Cushman to die. Then a miracle occurred for Cushman. The Union Army attacked the place she was to be executed, and the Confederates retreated. Cushman was rescued. For her bravery, Pauline Cushman was rewarded with an honorary commission and spent the rest of the war as Major Pauline Cushman. Some, like a woman who tried to rescue her husband from Fort Warren prison, took it upon themselves to stand up for their beliefs. Armed with a pistol, the woman crossed Nantasket River, climbed the walls of the prison, and released her husband with several others. They attempted to escape between the walls but were detected. Her gun backfired on her, killing her husband. Soon after, she was hanged.
Insult to her readers' intelligence, to the Confederacy, and to Southern womanhood.
Soldiers were mixed on the issue of women's involvement in the war. Some thought no woman should be near the battle line. Others supported women traveling in the ranks. Still others, although few in number, allowed women to serve openly in the ranks. One Confederate sergeant of artillery was found to be a woman when she was captured at Cold Harbor. Women like Nancy Hart and Mary Jane Green tried to enlist but were refused, so they became guerrillas instead, raiding through much of Northern Virginia and West Virginia.
We tend to think that Victorian women confined themselves to home and hearth and family, and many of them did. But I think women soldiers and other women who acted in non-traditional ways during the war point us towards evidence that women in Victorian America were not always content to be out of the public realm, and they weren't content to let the events of the world pass by without their direct input and participation.
What is significant about these women warriors is that they were there, that they fought, that they contributed their lives and their services to what causes they believed in. They sacrificed and suffered just like the men. And they were the beginning of what I believe was the new social and cultural revolution that's going to happen for the role of women in the United States at that time. Soldier husbands would return after the war to women who had been running their households and farms and plantations and basically take over the role of being husband and provider, only to find their wives reluctant to let loose of this new independence that they had felt. I think these soldier women perhaps were the first ones to taste that independence by being bold enough and brave enough to go into the field and, for many of them, make the ultimate sacrifice.
Between 250 and 1,000 women served as soldiers during the American Civil War on both sides, that's including both sides. They served as soldiers, whether to follow their husbands, their sweethearts, to earn money for their own jobs. Some of them had disguised themselves as men beforehand in order to earn money, and some from patriotism, and some just from a slight fanaticism.
Woman does not know that the story of her secret has now been chronicled in every newspaper over the country.
Gone by since the war started, when Albert Cashier was doing lawn work for a former senator. He accidentally backed his car into the Civil War veteran, and Albert was rushed to the hospital. While inspecting the broken leg, the doctor discovered that Albert had been disguising himself as a man for 60 years. Albert told them her real name was Jenny Hodgers and begged them to keep her secret. They did, and admitted her to the Veterans Hospital. Dementia set in, and Albert was transferred to the Waterton State Asylum. At the same time, the story broke in the newspapers, and her pension pay was questioned.
I think the fact that so many immigrant women were in the Union and Confederate armies is testament to how quickly they assimilated into America. Women, too, made this their country immediately, and when war broke out, they fought for their new country.
Born in Ireland, Jenny Hodgers made her way to America by stowing away on board a transport while still quite young. Not too long after she arrived, the Civil War broke out, and she decided to join the Union. She enlisted as Albert Cashier, farmer, age 18.
Lots of boys enlisted under the wrong name. So did I.
Once, while involved in the Vicksburg campaign, Albert was captured. Before she could be taken to the prison camps, however, she seized the captor's gun, knocked him down, and escaped. After Vicksburg fell, Albert Cashier's regiment saw action at Bryce's Crossroads, at the Battle for Nashville, and the Siege of Mobile, Alabama. Mobile was finally taken 2 days before President Lincoln was shot, and the war ended soon after. After the Civil War, Albert Cashier worked various odd jobs, always disguised as a man so that more options were available to her, and so she could receive her military pensions. She was stricken mentally ill about a year before her death.
I left Cashier, the fearless boy of 22, at the end of the Vicksburg campaign.
A husky comrade assisted Albert in handling the heavy assignments. Albert would volunteer to help with his chores.
He climbed a tall tree to put back a Union flag that had been shot
I
down.
never suspected at any time all through the service that Cashier was a woman. Were even closer among those who had fought and bled together.
A brave little soldier.
I was very much surprised.
He was equal to any in the company. In spite of his lack of height and brawn, he was able to withstand the problems of an infantryman as well as his comrades who were bigger and brawnier.
Many of her former colleagues came to stick up for her that the nursing home allowed her to stay, as long as she remained dressed in a skirt. She died only a few years later. Present at her funeral were a few of the surviving soldiers who had fought by her side, and many of the townsfolk who had enjoyed the company of Albert Cashier. She was buried with full military honors, wearing her Union uniform. The inscription on her tombstone reads, Albert D.J. Cashier, Company G, 95 Illinois Infantry.